So in this video, we are going to create a section percent gauge. So here we are on page 2. It has 3 different sections that come after it. So what we're going to do is, as we go to each of those sections, we're going to see a percent gauge up here that tells us how much we have completed in this particular section. So section 1 happens to have 3 pages. So as we step through these pages, we'll see this go from 1/3 to 2/3 to 3/3 as we visit the different pages in here. We'll return back to the home, and then section 3 has 5 pages, so we'll see that increase as we step through those pages. So let's see how this is done. It's all done on a single master, so let's switch over to our Masters tab. And here we have both a lesson gauge, which tells us how far along in the lesson we are, as well as a section gauge, which will be reused for the different sections. So let's take a look at some of these actions. We've got our next button, our back button. The home button just returns us to page 2. We have some helper actions here. So this basically is just updating this page title with the current page name. So in our example lesson that doesn't have any real content, we can at least tell what page we're on. And then finally, we're updating our lesson gauge, which is down here at the bottom. So this percent gauge is basically just telling us, if we had 10 pages in our lesson, it's getting the total page count of 10. If we were on page 4, it would return, page 4. So we would divide 4 by 10, we would get 0.4. And then we're multiplying that times 100, so we're at 40%. And then we're updating our lesson percent gauge based on that. So this sort of thing makes more sense in a linear lesson where you start at the beginning and you go to the end. When you have a non-linear lesson like what we're going to build, there might be some other more sophisticated ways that we could represent the amount of completion in the lesson. We'll take a look at why this is a little bit strange in a moment. So the heart of the action is all here for the section gauge. Basically, on page change or on page load, we are, well, first of all, we are hiding this if we're on page 1 or 2. Basically, whatever our intro area is, we're just going to hide it because it doesn't make sense to show it. But once we are within each of these sections, there's an easy way to basically define the start of a section and the end of a section, and then update our gauge amount, kind of using the same principles as this. We get the current page and the total page count, we divide them, and then we multiply that by 100, and that tells us what our gauge is. So doing a little bit of math, we can reuse this logic. So we just define, where a section starts, where it ends. We can determine if we are within that page range. So if we're greater than or equal to the section start, or less than or equal to the section end, we'll just do a bit of math here. So we'll get the current page number, subtract the section start. So let's say we're on page 3. It would be 3 minus 3 plus 1, so that's 1. And we're going to divide that by the length of this page, so or this section. So we take 5 minus 3, we get 2. We're going to add 1. So we're taking 1 divided by 3 and then translating that into a percentage and then updating the gauge based on that. And then if we were on page 4, the math would sort of work out so that we were 2/3 of the way through that section. Let's take a quick look at how to build this action using local variables. So I'm going to expand this here. And we're just going to build the same action over here on the right. So the first thing that we need is a local variable. So we'll go to variables and grab this initialize local. And we're going to click the green plus because we want 2 local variables. So the neat thing about local variables is that you can create them and then they exist and you can use them within this area. And then once the action reaches the end of that area, like here, they cease to exist. So they can be reused, redefined and reused, and then they cease to exist here again. So they're great for this little, for this sort of functionality where you're building small pieces of logic, especially if you want to reuse them. So we have these 2 here. I'll click inside of here and rename this. So I'll call this section underscore start, hit enter, and then the same thing here. So section underscore end. And we're going to define these. We're just going to set them up with some values. So I'll go to the value tab, grab a number, and duplicate that block and plug it in here. So if our section start is 3 and our section end is 5, I can just enter those in. Then we want a condition. So I'll go to Control, grab a conditional block, and plug that in. And we're going to look to see if we are between 2 values. So I'm going to go to the value category and grab the AND block. So I'll plug that in here. And then I can take this that came with my condition and put it in. And now we can see if we are, if the current page, so we'll go to the page category and find page number. And we'll say if that is greater than or equal to our section start. So if you want to use these global variables, or I'm sorry, these local variables, you can just mouse over it and you get this little flyout panel. The same way when you mouse over one of these tabs, you get a large flyout panel. We can mouse over this and we get this tiny little flyout panel that gives us our get and our set. So I want the get. We'll just plug that in here. And I'll duplicate this whole segment and put it in here. And then we want to know if our page number is less than or equal to our section end. So again, I could mouse over this and get the section end, or I can click on this drop down and find section end here. So either way works. Local variables will just show the name here in this variable drop down list without the word global. All right, so we have our condition. Now we wanted to set our section gauge. So let's go find that. We'll select it. And we will use the set value. And then we can just set up all of this math. So this is all handled using those math blocks, which we can find under value. And we can just get this +1 and then use it along with these various numbers. So I like to work from the right-hand side in towards the left. So we'll start with minus. We'll get the page number. We already grabbed that from the page category, but why get it again if it's right there? We'll duplicate the section start. We will add 1, so I can just duplicate this, change it to a plus. And you know what? I'm going to reuse this a whole bunch of times, so let's just keep 1 here. All right, so we have that +1. We'll duplicate this whole thing, and we'll say our section end minus the section start. Okay, so that's all good. And you'll notice that we get this exclamation point here. That's because we're building this action outside of our local variable, so it doesn't actually know that this exists. Once we plug this in here, that will disappear because it can find the local variable. So we won't worry about that too much for now. All right, so we've got these 2 pieces, and we just need to divide them and then multiply it by 100. So let's duplicate this. We'll change it from plus to division. And then finally, we'll use this last one, and we'll change it to multiply. And then we can just snap all of that in. So this action is now basically just doing the same thing that this is, and we just assembled it from pieces under value, the page category, and the local variables from the variable section. So let's run through this. So let's run through section 2 a little bit here. So section 2 has 4 pages in it. And so here we are on page 6, and the math is just working out so that we're a quarter of the way through, half of the way through, 3/4 of the way through when we're on page 8, and then we're completely through it once we're on page 9. So let's take a look at that section and how easy it is to add or remove sections. So we'll expand our action block area. And you can see that basically we've defined, the first section starting at 3 and ending at 5. We're just doing this math if it's between that section. But if it's not going to do anything. So once we enter the next section, pages 6 through 9, that's when this will sort of kick in because of our conditional action. And this is all repeated. We'll look at a way to sort of centralize it. But let's say we wanted to add a section from 10 to 14. So I'll just remove that for now. And if we wanted to add in a new section from 10 to 14, we can just duplicate this whole segment, place it right below, and then just update this. So 10 through 14. And now that will work. And that will work for any number of sections and any number of pages. So let's say we wanted yet another section that we haven't created yet. We would just duplicate that block, add it in here, and now say our section will start at 15 and it will go through 25. So that would work if we had those pages. So it's pretty easy to add and remove sections. We'll just go ahead and delete this. And let's say we moved one of these pages from one section to another. So let's go ahead and do that. So here what we'll do is we'll take page 9 and we'll move it out of this section and move it into section 3. So we'll take this page and move it down there. So now we need to go and update these pages. So we'll return to, well, first of all, page 2, because this button is going to try to take us straight here to page 10. So we need to update that. And back on the master, we just need to update where our sections start and end now. So down here in this action, section 2 is no longer pages 6 through 9, it's pages 6 through 8. And section 3 is no longer 10 through 14, it's 9 through 14. So we can return to this branching page and preview from here. And we will see when we go to section 3, we'll be on page 9. There's page 9. And you can see that it's filling in a little bit less. And then as we move forward through these, it's filling up until we get all the way to page 14, which is the end of that section. So let's look at some other improvements that we can make to this lesson. The first one is we can get our lesson gauge to work so that when we jump to section 3, it doesn't jump all the way up here, and then when we return to section 1, it jumps back to here. So for example, when I go to the first page of section 3, it moves up here because that's much farther along in my lesson. But then if we go to section 1, it only goes to here. And then whenever I return home, it goes back to here. So it doesn't really feel like we're progressing. We're sort of moving forward and backwards. Feels a little counterintuitive. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add a menu to our master and update this based on the number of completed pages. So there's one thing that we need to fix. Back on the first page, our intro splash page, we had previously removed the master from this page. So we will want to add it back just because it makes updating the menu a little bit easier. So let's return to page 1. And we have basically our background master already on this page. And we're going to add back in our other master that has a home, the next button, the page title, and all that stuff. If we did not do that, if the learner ever returned to page 1, the menu would no longer exist, and their progress would be completely reset, and they would have to go through the whole lesson again. So let's return to the master now that we have this master applied to every page in our lesson. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a menu object, and I'll just place it here. We'll eventually move it off screen, but we'll leave it here for now. And let's return to this action. So currently this was set up to say, whatever page we're on. If we're on page 2 out of 10, we would be at 20%. If we were on page 8 out of 10, we would be at 80%. But with a nonlinear course, we're jumping around all over the place, so we might view, page 8 before we view page 2 or 3. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set up our menu object, going under the menu actions. We're going to say set current page to complete. So we're going to grab this, plug it in here. So every time the page loads or the page changes, we're going to set whatever page we're currently on to complete. And then we're no longer going to use a page number. We're going to get the list of completed pages from the menu and find out how many items are in that, and then divide that by the total page count. So we'll go to the menu flyout panel, and we'll say we'll get this blue block, which is basically the list of completed pages. So let's say I had page 2 complete and page 7 complete and page 9 complete. It would be a list of 2, 7, and 9. So what we'll do is we'll get the length of that list, basically how many items are in that list. So we'll go to our list category and grab this length of list block. We don't need this. And we'll plug this in there instead. And now we can just plug this in here. And regardless of the path that we take, well, let's go ahead and just run it. So we'll return to the flow, and we'll go ahead and preview. And this menu is going to be here in our way, but that's okay. We'll move it out of the way eventually. So now that we have, one page completed, this is partially filled in. And then we're on page 2, so it's more completed. So let's just jump straight to section 3. Oh, except my menu is on top of my buttons. We'll move it over here for now. And let's go ahead and show a check mark, just so we can kind of see what's going on. All right, let's run this again. All right, so there's our menu. It looks ugly, but we don't care. We're going to hide it eventually. So now, as we go through this in a nonlinear fashion, let's say we're going to go through section 3, we can see these check marks are starting to fill in. And as we view more pages, as soon as we view that page, it automatically gets checked. And this will get more and more filled in. And there's no more page after page 14. So we'll return to our home branching page. And now if we go down section 3 again, we're not getting those double counted because it was already checked and marked as complete. It's already being factored in here. So we're not double dipping on these pages. But if I go to a different page in the lesson, that I have not been to yet, this increases. And then we'll return home, and then we'll finally check out section 2. And now this increases again until finally we've viewed all the pages and our sort of progress bar here is completely filled in. So now wherever we go in the lesson, this is always sort of filled in. So the reason that we added the master back on page 1 is that if we were to allow people to go back to page 1 here and we had removed this master, our progress would be completely lost as soon as we got back to this page. So if you're going to use this method with the menu object, it's a good idea to make sure that the menu and the progress bar are attached to every page in the lesson, because you never want the menu to unload. And then the final interesting thing that we can do, well, let's go ahead and hide our menu, and then we'll look at trying to make the section actions a little bit easier to use. So let's return to the master. We no longer need to look at our menu, so I'm going to make it really small, and I'm going to just put it off the edge of the screen. And I can even turn off the start visible property, so we'll set this to false, because nobody needs to even know that it's there, so they won't accidentally tab to it or anything. All right, so the final thing that we're going to do is we're going to use what's called a procedure. If you've done any programming, it's basically we're going to create our own function. So you'll notice here with these different sections, there's a lot of redundant code, right? We have an if, do, and this is all doing the exact same thing that this is doing. So whenever you've got completely redundant code, what you can do is use a procedure. So we'll go over to Advanced and Procedure, and we're going to use this block here, define procedure, and call procedure. So we're going to define our procedure. We'll grab this. We will call it maybe update tracker. We don't need this block, so we can delete that. And basically what we're going to do is take this code and put it into there. Of course, this is going to break all these actions. So what we're going to do is click this green plus and create two variables, one called section start and one called section end. So section start and section end. All right, and those will find them because they have the same name, so that's good. And now what we'll do is we will call this procedure. So we'll go to Advanced, Procedure, create our call procedure block. And the procedure that we're going to call is this update tracker. So we'll just copy this name. And the argument list here is going to be a list with these two values. So we'll go to list, create list, and then we'll just grab this section start. That'll be the first one, and that will basically be passed along and be called section start in here. And then the same thing for the section end. We'll plug that in here, and then that will be section end here. So that means that we can just copy this, and anytime we're doing that same redundant code, instead we'll just call the procedure, which will do the redundant code. And we can do that again down here, and do that again here. So it's not really necessary for this case because it's already been sort of worked out, but if you ever need to make any updates to this logic over here, you can do it in one place, and these are basically just calling this procedure. It also allows us to duplicate these sections, and it's a little bit neater for the text that we need to update here, or the values that we need to update here. So if we were going to add another section, it's pretty easy, and we can duplicate this again and add, yet another section. So this is an optional step. It's not really necessary, but will sort of clean up your code a little bit, and it's a handy thing to know how to do.